Hello, this is the poorly named, unnamed podcast with Fowler and.
Ardot, I appreciate you raising your finger to let me know when to speak. Very polite and gentlemanly of you.
We're trying to not interrupt each other as much because it breaks down the quality of the
No,
audio.
no, no.
But
You're trying to
we're
not
gonna.
interrupt me. That's what's happening. Just a.
I would. I would never speak over women. I'm too woke for that. Our first story is basically going to be a continuation of last week. Tucker Carlson was fired as basically Fox's golden boy and their top pundit, and most of the coverage I've seen of it has basically been going over like speculation of why. And there's a lot of reasons. I mean, he was losing ads, which causes Fox money. He was a massive part of the $787.5 million lawsuit loss. He shit talked his bosses. He treated his staff like shit. I'm sure there's lots of things beyond that we don't know about. But I think the more interesting thing to talk about is Tucker Carlson having a very unique place in our politics as really a very populist figure. And, there's a lot of credence on Fox News, but when it comes to the conspiracy baiting and the attacking of the elites and just the framing of the way he did his show, I think that was a really unique show. And I've never really seen um, someone like that on like a massive corporate site.
Yeah, it's interesting because he was kind of like the mouthpiece um, for the modern day GOP culture war machine. He was kind of the captain of the ship, and so one of the questions that I think I have is with Fox News having lost their golden boy, um, whether or not his career is going to continue, um, or if he's going to kind of fade into
He'll
irrelevancy.
definitely he'll definitely like do something. He just I don't think will have the reach cuz like Fox is such a massive media empire. Being at the top of that like allows you to reach people, you know.
Yeah,
But I think Tucker will be the last of his kind. Like because of the Dominion and Smartmatic lawsuits, I don't think they're going to allow a host to be um is hardline and is conspiratorial. And I think because of like the MAGA movement, like the new hosts, they will do culture war bullshit. They will lie to their audience, but they're not going to be like Tucker and like how unique he was. There are historical examples of other people like Tucker Carlson, like Father Coughlin and the like, but
and could you
it's
explain who Father Coughlin is, just for people who aren't aware of who he is, since he was way before any of our times, or any probably of our audience's times?
yeah, Father Coughlin was an Irish priest, anti-Semite, and fascist in the 1930s. He had like 30 million people a week listen to his radio show. And he started as an ally of FDR, but he kind of devolved eventually. And he ended up being someone who spread a lot of Jewish conspiracy theories and praised Hitler and Mussolini. And by the end of his career, he was essentially a Nazi. But populists have always been profitable, like railing against the elite, galvanizing the public. Um, that's always been something that's really profitable, and populists tend to do pretty well in the media environment, but they're still a pretty rare phenomenon because I think they're very dangerous to media corporations and businesses. They rile up people and point them to pick up their torches and pitchforks in a way that I think scares off a lot of people. And I think Tucker was an example of like the the money they thought they could make on him being worth the potential danger to themselves if he radicalized his audience in ways that were counter to like the business elites that run the Republican Party.
Yeah, and kind of sliding, backtracking a bit to Father Coughlin. If I remember correctly, one of the things that sort of ended the reign of Father Coughlin, or severely diminished his influence across the United States, was that the courts ruled. I think it was the Supreme Court. Am I right about that, Fowler? You know more about this than I do. Was it the Supreme Court or was it FDR
I don't remember
himself?
which court, but basically the church abandoned him, and then the government ruled that he couldn't basically do hate speech on the radio.
Which that was that set a precedent, I think. Um, and I think since then we've not really seen a political pundit with as much prominence and reach as Tucker Carlson teeter the line, as closely as Tucker has, and I think that's what's made you know his career or what he's been doing at Fox News so astounding. Is you have a pundit who fairly often touted white replacement conspiracy theories, who implied at one point, I believe, that apartheid in South Africa was a net positive, um, and who said all
Yeah,
sorts of things. There hasn't really been a pundit, in our lifetime who has been that blatant, um, and who has had such a reach. And
I would agree. I would agree with that.
yeah, so it's.
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can continue, my friend.
Oh yeah, I think. Like Tucker Carlson. I don't think the thing that makes him. I guess it does to some degree. The conspiracy theories make it harder to like find ads for his shows and all that. But I think Tucker also like the ways he would challenge the FBI and the government, and the ways he would talk about like dark money. I think the danger of him, besides the racism, was kind of the idea that he could radicalize people to believe in things that were contrary to sort of the mainstream. You know, like Bill O'Reilly was racist, and Bill O'Reilly did do culture war bullshit, but Bill O'Reilly never really, even performatively challenged power in the way Tucker Carlson was willing to,
Yeah,
with his like obsession with the deep state and sort of like uncovering them and going after them. And even if Tucker Carlson did it in a very disingenuous way, and he kind of was pointing to like a mirage rather than the real thing, I could see why like advertisers or parent companies would be afraid of millions of people being obsessed with the deep state. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there. The challenging of power is I think what made him different from other political pundits that said cringe shit but didn't really get into the conspiracy of it. And so it's going to be interesting to see, if he is going to have a replacement or if Fox News has learned their lesson, when it comes to hiring dangerous political pundits, or if this will hurt Fox's bottom line in the end. So it'll be interesting to see who fills his late night spot. Um,
I think they have two problems, but the problems kind of the solution to one makes the other worse. One of their problems is they've created an audience of like populist um right winger types. And like if they stop doing the sort of Tucker Carlson style like radical right rhetoric, they're gonna lose audience share to places like OAN or Newsmax. Like they're no longer gonna have the stranglehold on the industry that they do. But also, they don't want to be sued for billions of dollars for doing those sorts of lies. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, where if they lean into it to keep their audience share, they're probably going to get sued more and more. And then if they pull back in order to avoid those lawsuits, they might become irrelevant, because the the Republican voter might just move past them essentially.
yeah, I wonder if there's any polling out there to indicate the opinions of Fox News, from Republican viewers. I know that I had read that they lost significant viewership after Jan 6 and after the announcement of the Dominion lawsuit. Um, I think it was a poll, and I wish I had sources for this. I'm big on sources, but I believe I read a poll a while back that said that the average Fox viewer trusts Fox News less, after the initial announcement of the Dominion lawsuit. I think back in like the beginning of this year. Um,
Do you remember the size difference of the polling? Like what percentile roughly?
it was like It's a pretty significant percentage. I mean, it still wasn't enough, but it was a decent percentage. I know that their viewership has decreased as well since Jan 6. But I would imagine that those peeling away from Fox were moderate Republicans who would watch Fox News, while consuming news from other sources at the same time.
Yeah,
I
that
would
might be a safe bet.
yeah, I'd imagine their most radical viewers are still sticking with them, but moderate Republicans still watch Fox. Fox News does have a significant, moderate base. And those are the people most likely to be turned off by the events of January 6th and, Trump's behavior.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what changes they make in Fox to keep their audience, but to avoid the lawsuit stuff. But I would be very surprised if they bring on someone as their main guy who is as out there and sort of crazy as Tucker Carlson. I think there's a very good chance that he's the last of his kind and that he was Icarus. He flew a little too close to the sun and,
He got burned. Or didn't Icarus, blow up?
he drowned. He fell into the sea and drowned.
Wait, how can he fly but not swim? Anyway, I don't know. I don't want to question the ancient gods and their fucking inconsistent ass mythology.
It's plenty consistent. His wax wings melted because he flew too close to the
How did
sun, and then he
Medusa
fell
sleep
into the.
with her
What do you
snake
mean?
hair? How did the snakes on Medusa's head shit? That's what I want to know.
You got to hold it in like a monk-like meditative pose. So you're always sitting up.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Just dropping truth bombs.
All right, we're gonna move on to our next segment. Do you have anything else to say about the Tucker segment, Fowler?
No, I think
Before
we're
we...
good. We can move on to Cleopatra.
Yes, this is my segment, baby. This is the doozy. So, as you probably have heard by now, I mean, I would be shocked if you haven't heard because it's been dominating, uh, maybe not in the news, but definitely social media. Netflix is releasing a new documentary series about the life and exploits of Cleopatra. Now, the series is being produced by Jada Pinkett Smith. It is, I think, the second season in the overall African Queen series. First season, which was about Queen, and I swear to God, I hope I'm not butchering this woman's name, Queen Njinga, who was the mother of Angola and who was a formidable African queen that united many tribes against the Portuguese and I believe Dutch. I watched the first season; it was pretty decent. Queen Njinga is a pretty impressive historical figure, and I'm, you know, very happy that she got a series because, in my opinion, more people need to know more about her and about what she got up to. And so, the second season is going to be about the Egyptian ruler, or really, should I say, Macedonian Greek ruler, Cleopatra. And there was some controversy because the casting of Cleopatra seemed to be pushing a specific Afrocentric agenda. Now, for those of you who don't know, Afrocentrism, very large body of work. It essentially is a field of study that was, I think, partially developed by W.E.B. Du Bois back in the day. Although what it encompasses today, I really don't know. I mean, it could be Afrocentrism can be anything from just reading books by, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Frantz Fanon, to like believing that to just being Kanye West. Like that it's a very large it's a very large breadth of quote unquote study. And I put quotes, not trying to delegitimize Booker T and Frederick Douglass, but to say that Kanye West is not a scholar. So basically, what happened is that the Cleopatra series cast a black woman. The actress, I believe, is she's half British and half. She's mixed race. She's a mixed race of British actress. No hate to her. You got to get your money, I guess. But the controversy, you know, the controversy sort of came from the fact that they didn't just inaccurately cast Cleopatra, but the documentary seems to be making the assertion, an assertion that is very common in like Hotep Afrocentric spaces, that Cleopatra was black, you know, air quotes on black, because blackness is a political identity that is it is completely inappropriate to take that label and apply it thousands of years ago, during the you know Egyptian times and Roman times. Um, when in reality, Cleopatra was Macedonian Greek. But Greek. She most likely had red hair. That that is one claim that's been made. We do know for a fact that she was of the Macedonian Greek line. She was born in Alexandria, but she was of Macedonian Greek ancestry. Um, and she ruled over Egypt essentially as a foreign invader. Um, so I think it's just interesting that they're trying to do the yes queen girl power on essentially, for lack of a better word, colonizer. But
I think the
that's
reality is the narratives are always going to be a bit messy
yeah,
because you like it's just like with the founding fathers, how most of them didn't view themselves as American, they viewed themselves by their states. But that doesn't fit with the narrative or the way that we view the world now. So every time you go back far enough in history, you have to sort of force um, the divisions and groups of that time period into a modern context in order to make sense of it. I think it becomes problematic depending on how much that myth is a lie. I think all myths about nations and people are somewhat, you know, they're somewhat inaccurate because they have to combine two different eras into one nomenclature. But sometimes it can be pretty egregious, like the Lost Cause, Southern myth of
yeah,
the way that like the old South existed.
yeah. And I think the reason there's been so much blowback is because the ethnic background of ancient Egypt has been a long-standing source of controversy and division. On the one hand, you have Afrocentrists who claim that Egypt was a black civilization, that Cleopatra was black, that black people built the pyramids. And again, I want to stress, because I there's a sense of uncomfortability that I have discussing this, because black is a political term. Egypt, from what I understand, there are many different types of people living in Egypt. There always have been. They can range from, copper skinned to pale skinned. You know, Cleopatra was of Macedonian Greek ancestry, so she was, her family was from an even farther north area. Um, she would have never considered herself black because that term did not exist back then, and she, you know, based on the bust and the paintings we have of her, she was most likely a lighter skinned, possibly redheaded Greek woman. But what's interesting about the controversy is, I think, the insistence of a narrative, the insistence on the creation of a narrative. And I think that fundamentally is what this all boils down to. You know, putting aside who Cleopatra was, because that's not really what I'm interested in. I don't really. We know who Cleopatra was. You know, uh, we know essentially what she looked like roughly. And the actress that's playing Cleopatra, in my opinion, doesn't look out of place in Egypt. I mean, you know, it's not completely impossible that she could have she could have played Nefertiti. That's what I thought was kind of odd. The actress that plays Cleopatra looks more like Nefertiti than she does Cleopatra. So just the casting choice there is a bit odd. What I think is the most egregious is the insistence that this is accurate history. And you can see from the Cleopatra trailer that I think there's a part in it where she might be a historian, I'm not sure. We only have a trailer to go off of, but she says something along the lines of, "I don't care. My grandmother told me I don't care what they told you in school. Cleopatra was black." Um, stellar history right there. Stellar academia. Uh, um, but I think what's more important is the narrative, right? And how media is used to craft narratives. Um, and oftentimes those narratives, and I think this is, the entire point of modern day Afrocentrism. Um, it's predominantly Black Americans attempting to kind of find their niche in history. And in doing so, they create falsehoods. Um, they co opt, they sort of twist, the truth of history. Um, and I think that's
Do you
something
think they
that,
do that intentionally, or do you think that they're just believe in things that aren't real?
I don't know. I don't know. And it's partially because Afrocentrism doesn't have any sort of institutional power, in the same way that Eurocentrism does. I mean, Afrocentrism was created as a counter to Eurocentrism, and Eurocentrism has been very detrimental. It's Eurocentrism has disregarded the histories of numerous peoples across pretty much the entirety of Africa, but also Native American history. The history of Native people in South America, in Canada, in Australia, in all over the world. So Afrocentrism was created as a counter to that. But it's unfortunately it has absorbed the more dangerous elements of its counterpart, which is Eurocentrism. So I'm not necessarily sure if it's that the people making these claims are true believers, or if it's that they've been misled from, or if it's a deliberate attempt at crafting narratives. Uh, I don't know. I don't know the intentions of very hardcore Afrocentrists. I mean, I've met Afrocentrists that truly believe in the things that they say. Um, but whether or not in the case of this Netflix series it is a deliberate attempt, I can't say. And I don't want to speculate too much, because the series has not come out yet, and then also, you know, um, you never know. They could address it in the series. There could be a very specific reason, but based on what I've seen so far, it's a very odd. Um, it leans towards implications that I'm not particularly comfortable with. Um, so when we talk about narratives, and I think this even ties back to what we were talking about with Tucker Carlson. Narratives are a very powerful tool, and narratives are oftentimes all we have. And historical narratives are very powerful. Like you mentioned, the Southern, the lost cause myth. Like when you create a narrative, it can have ripple effects that last for generations.
It
Um,
frames the way that you relate to the world and everyone else in the world around you.
exactly. And so, um, you know, and I've watched videos from people from Egypt, people from the Middle East, people from Greece, and they talk about the co-opting of their history by American companies, which is a completely valid complaint and concern. Um, but I think it just emphasizes the idea that America and American companies, that we globally export our narratives to the world because of our position as a world power. Um, and so, like you mentioned before, um, that means that we understand history through our modern context, even if our modern context are not the same as the context of other countries, even in the present. So I'm curious to see if this is going to be an ongoing sort of like ideological struggle within the media, not just entertainment media, but also news media. Who controls the narrative? Um, what narratives are going to be are going to be created? What parts of history are going to be sort of either exaggerated or rewritten to further advance a political cause? This is kind of
It'll
the
be
oh,
it'll be based on convenience, I think.
you think it'll be based on convenience?
Yeah, I wonder if that narrative will be replaced more and more by like the Hispanic narratives, as like black people don't really their population doesn't expand, and like the voting demographic that matters more and more besides white people is Hispanics. I wonder if we'll sort of see a shift of media in that direction instead.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned like Hispanics because I think one of the narratives that's being created right now is the narrative of the Hispanic, the narrative of, all Hispanic people from, Mexico all the way down to the tip of South America being condensed into one ethnic group, when in reality, that's just not the case. A Guatemalan immigrant and a Mexican immigrant and a Cuban immigrant, or a, Puerto Rican immigrant, all, considered Hispanic, but they all have very different histories. And the narrative that's being created now, I think, is to condense all these groups of people into one sort of racial category that fits neatly within the way that we divide ourselves up in the United States. The same thing is happening to, I think, Asian American immigrants. And the same thing happens with African immigrants. African immigrants that come over to the United States are considered black, even though many of them, from what I've seen, regard themselves as, um, from either the African country they come to or from the Caribbean country that they come to. If we're talking about, Haitians, Dominicans, um, Jamaicans, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
So I think that is definitely a narrative that persists. And whether or not this narrative will be successful, we have yet to see. Um, so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what works and what doesn't. The Cleopatra casting has already received significant backlash from the Egyptian community online and from I think the Greek community online as well. I believe an Egyptian historian is suing Netflix for the inaccuracies. Um,
Narrative. I think it's very interesting when narratives are different based on or not different, but like how nations and peoples deal with losing. And I think
mhm.
that's often where the more poisonous narratives come to be is rejection of like certain historical facts or um, or framing the losses in very romantic or sort of idealistic ways that aren't true, and then those people never really have to confront the realities of what they've done and the costs of those things.
Yeah, it's I mean, I definitely think on that same vein, this sort of new resurgence of Afrocentrism is, in the same vein that I think the lost cause myth still persists. I definitely think that, and I somewhat sympathize with, the trauma that was the transatlantic slave trade, of Jim Crow, of all the horrible things that happened. Um, I believe I heard I saw a term. Somebody said that Afrocentrism is just Eurocentrism in blackface. It's the same sort of toxic um, co-opting of you know different histories. I've heard people say, well, why don't they explore the histories of West Africa, of Mansa Musa, of all the other West African kingdoms that existed and had really fascinating and intricate histories. And I think a lot of that is because you know within the global world there is an understanding that Egypt was an exceptional civilization, you know, and it interacted obviously with other, with the Roman Empire, with was Egypt part of the Ottoman Empire at one point as well? Let me fact
I
check.
don't know.
Um, Egypt has a very important place in history because of its geographical location, um, and so it's kind of like, why go big or why go home when you can go big? It's like, why why not co-opt, a civilization that has global prominence? And I think that's why there is this push to sort of claim Egypt specifically. Um,
I
just
think
as there
this is
was a
also
push to
really
claim
interesting
Egypt, yeah, just
when
I
it
was going to
comes
say
to
real
like
quick,
people.
just as there was an
Okay.
attempt by, you know, Western Europeans to claim Egypt as a white civilization you know, back in the day. So it's been a back and forth that's existed for centuries.
Yeah, definitely. And you can even see that like outside of racial narratives in terms of like people narratives. Like the way that the Republican Party co-ops Lincoln or Teddy Roosevelt, despite the fact that they ideologically don't like align in any way with the demographics or the party. You know,
Yeah.
I'm very most of history, especially national history, is somewhat fictitious. Like I'm very cynical of the idea of history being used accurately in politics because the reality is that history is complicated and nuanced and like weighed down by the context and baggage that it has, and it doesn't fit into bumper stickers or slogans or the sort of good evil dynamic that a lot of politics falls into. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And, um and this sort of inability to discuss that nuance um hinders national dialogue a lot of the times. So it's definitely the co-opting of people is a political is also a political strategy. Um, and it's a political strategy that I think everyone should be more aware of. Um, I think like we've transformed MLK. We've stripped a lot from Martin Luther King Jr. and he is pretty much just a political pawn now. Although I don't know if he was ever going to be anything else but that after he died. Um, when you consider what he stood for and what he did. Um, do you have anything else to add, Fowler, about that? I just thought, the
I don't
Tucker
think
being
so.
fired and Cleopatra and all of that going down in the span of a week was pretty interesting because it does speak to narratives. Um, it does speak to the power of narratives and how media is so integral in crafting those narratives, both politically, on the news side, and then also just through entertainment. Um, and whether I'm curious, how these narratives will get more complex as we enter into a new sort of digital age, um, where everybody has access to the internet, everybody has access, for the most part, to these programs. And as education becomes more fractured and more specialized, so you're going to have people, I think, who grow up believing that Cleopatra was um that who grew up believing the Afrocentric myth of Cleopatra. You're gonna have people
I mean,
who,
that's even true now, where the South often teaches that the Civil War is the war of Northern aggression. Like those narratives exist everywhere.
yeah,
But as I don't know, if we go through a period where states control more and more power, then the education will become more and more splintered, and that will definitely affect a lot of things.
yeah, yeah, it absolutely will. Um, so might talk more about definitely we'll talk more about Tucker Carlson as more information comes out about his firing. We don't know now why he was fired. And more information might come out about the Cleopatra stuff. I am somewhat disappointed. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I am, I am disappointed and also questioning. I have a lot of questions. um, that I'm probably never going to get answers to. Actually, I'm never going to get answers to. But do you want to go ahead and sign off, Fowler? Do you have anything else you want to add in the last section of this podcast?
No, I think I'm good. We'll obviously put out another episode next week, and I hope you all have a good time in between.
It was very nice. It's a very sweet sign off.
Sweet as poison pie.
Well, exactly what Fowler said. I appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I will see you all in the next podcast.